Hi there. Did you miss me? I took a week off. I've been doing this for a really long time and I really had to take that week vacation. But I am back now and we're talking law enforcement in our country. Again, because Trinidad and Tobago does seem to have some problems with law enforcement. Different agencies in our national law enforcement, national security structure seem to regularly run up into some problems beyond the obvious between the criminals and the law enforcers. Now, a lot of the problems seem to be coming from the inside. Those horrors where they're talking about the voices coming from inside the building. Well, it's kind of that in this case. It seems like a lot of the problems in our law enforcement agencies do seem to circulate from the inside of them. And that's the really frustrating part, because in a society you're expecting there to be criminals. Okay, it's not everyone wants to obey all the laws, and that's expected. You're expecting a certain amount of sociopaths, I guess, and psychopaths even in your society, and some of them would have a lean towards deviance, and okay, that's expected. But you also expect that your society would generally have a structure to deal with that. The law enforcement agencies, and usually the general structure of a society is law enforcement deals with lawbreakers to some amount of proficiency, except when the law enforcement themselves are the criminals. And that seems to always be the problem with nearly any one of those measures where we attempt. I call the entire thing about it trying to legislate morality, because morality has to do with our behavior, good, bad, evil, all that. And how do you behave? What actions do you do on a daily basis? And what generally the laws and constitution of a country tries to do is they try to put legal frameworks in place to try to stipulate the morality of this country, how we want people in this country to behave. But the thing with morality is, generally speaking, that takes another space in your mind. That usually is more of a religious or spiritual lean. And I think it is actually impossible to legislate morality. There aren't enough words to be written down on enough pages to be able to write clear laws that would make sure everyone behaves properly. That's why you generally depend on morally upright people in your law enforcement agencies, and then surrounded by some sensibly written laws. And that's generally, to me, how you get a basic handle on crime. But that's a lot to hope for. We're checking out two main stories today. One dealing with the licensing authority, and then the next one dealing with those that seem to be making the forefront of the news a lot today, or these days recently, the prisons officers. And that's a difficult job they have. So before we get into that, if you haven't clicked that like button yet, you really should do that. Make sure the algorithm is, pumping in my favor this missed week. Let's catch up with that. Send the video out to as many people as possible. Share it if you feel so obliged to. And let's get into it. Licensing recalling 700,000 driver's permits. Fraudulent activity tainting system. This is a Guardian article from Saturday, December 4th. The licensing division is moving to implement new driver's permits by month's end. The initiative is aimed at stopping false driver's licenses from being produced by fraudsters, and which are now widely used by Venezuelans and TNT nationals. It is unknown how many of these fake DPs are in the hands of non-nationals. However, Transport Commissioner Clive Clark, in face-to-face interview on Thursday with Guardian Media at the Ministry of Works and Transport headquarters in Port of Spain, confirmed that some of the holders of fraudulent permits are Venezuelans, while some bogus licenses have been engaging the attention of the TNT police service. Speaking in the presence of Work and Transport Minister Rohan Sinanan, Clark said one way of stopping the forged permits being used was by issuing new permits with security features and hidden markings by the end of this year, and recalling over 700,000 valid permits in the coming months. Again, that's an attempt to legislate morality, as I would put it. That we have so many fake licenses out there, we have to capture back in all of them and redo the entire process, I am sure at a high fee. And whether you have to pay directly for the license again or not, you're still paying for it because it's a government service and we pay for the government services by and large. Clark made it clear that the fake permits were being replicated by individuals outside the ambit of their offices. He made it clear that this had nothing to do with the licensing officers. And I do not believe that. I do not believe it in the least. You tell me, drop a comment. Tell me in the comments if you believe that the fraudulent activity, well, he's speaking very specifically in this case, the fraudulent driver's licenses have nothing to do with anyone in the licensing authority. I don't believe that because I happen to live in Trinidad and I happen to have been doing this all my life. I am an expert at living in Trinidad. I know this very well. And I happen to know that the licensing authority in Trinidad and Tobago is one of the most corrupt institutions. And I would say that unapologetically because that's not an individual and there's no threat of there's no threat of a lawsuit in me saying that. But it is known. I remember quite a few people would know. There are some people would literally walk into the licensing authority, the licensing service, sit down in the car, don't even do a test. They just sit in the car, get that form signed, and now they are licensed to be on the road. And the part that I really don't understand about this is when they do something like that, you just rubber stamp some crackpot to go on the nation's road. By the next day, and many times this licensing officer, I'm sure if they were to be left alone with this driver, this new driver in this car, they would be afraid. And by the next day, that same driver would now be able to be on the nation's road with the rest of us. And no wonder we have a set of people on the nation's road who don't even know how to merge onto the highway or have no idea how to use a roundabout. But let me not get started on our nation's road. That might be a whole other hour-long video. Since his appointment in March 2020, Clark said licensing division has picked up a number of false permits containing names, addresses, and dates of births of legitimate drivers, while the photograph bears the image of someone else. Oh, so it's that kind of forgery where they take your license, change your picture, and someone else may be driving with all of your information, but with another picture. But still, I think in order to do that, they have to have some kind of access to that database or access to your license at some point in time. We have seen an upsurge in duplicate numbers where persons are having false driver's permits being created on the outside in order for that to look as close as possible to our records. They are basically using what we call our number range. But that is in no way on our records, Clark said. Pressed on how many fake permits they have been picked up under his tenure, or they have been picked up under his tenure, Clark said roughly 700. And he took tenure, if I remember correctly, at the start of this article. They said somewhere around the start of this year was when he began. Since his appointment in March, well, that's the start of last year, So that's about a year and a half around there, and 700 of these false permits they have already found. In January, Clark said they will introduce an online provisional system using codes for every service transaction. This system will pave the way for the renewal of permits and vehicle transfers online. Now, hallelujah, I would be very grateful for that. If everything could be done online and I do not need to go down into the licensing office for some of those more trivial things, I'm in full agreement with that. By the end of December, a new driver's permit, will be out. That permit itself provides us with the data set and the environment to commence that online renewal, because we are changing the design of the permit. You will have the opportunity to upload your picture onto the permit. Oh, well, look at that. You can upload your permit picture as your profile picture. Up with the Times Trinidad and Tobago. I'm happy to see it. Following this process, the applicant, Clark said, would have to visit a licensing office to verify their documents. Collection of the renewal will have to be made at a TT Connect site or a licensing office, with the old driver's permit being surrendered. What would happen there, a number of persons would not be able to submit their expired permit and documents because they are walking around with bogus documents right now. I understand the idea that you're saying, that if you have to return those bogus documents, that would be one way we'd catch them. And okay, I agree. Some of them would be weeded out of the system there. But as I stated at the beginning, the problem with legislating morality is if within that new system you have the same immoral players, the same corrupt players on the inside, then what's going to happen is they would just get a new fake license, or someone there would say yes, they returned that license while they didn't. There are always ways around these processes when you're dealing with corrupt people. Without divulging too much, Clark boasted that the new permits will be embedded with enhanced security features and markings aimed at preventing duplication. The special markings will be detected by law enforcement officers using handheld devices. If a permit does not have these markings, it will be deemed fraudulent. He said the new permits will also have what we called ghost pictures. A ghost image is a smaller version of an original photo on a card, and it's usually printed in a semi-transparent form. Okay, so they're going to load up this new permit with new security features, but I seem to recall that the old new permit was supposed to be one with new security features that negate that too. So I guess we're going to be constantly improving, trying to move faster than the fraudsters, constantly in a race to outrun the fraudsters, instead of just trying to get some of those mean fraudsters out of the actual enforcement detail, the people who are supposed to be ensuring there isn't fraud. If you have some fraudsters in there, it becomes really difficult to actually get rid of those fraudsters. And after they have started the rollout in these new permits, for those who are renewing permits, they are going to recall all the old permits at some point in time next year. At least that's the proposal that is currently being put forward, and all 700,000 of the driver's permits in Trinidad and Tobago will have to be renewed. That's the idea, to get rid of some of the fraud. And that might get rid of some of the duplicate driving fraud, but I might trust some of those duplicate driving fraud Venezuelans on our road more than the ones who have bought the Shore Pass licenses. Yes, I know the name is Shore Pass because I've heard it before, and I wouldn't doubt you have heard it before too. And I wouldn't doubt some people looking at this video right now could be feeling a little guilty because they themselves paid for that same Shore Pass in Trinidad and Tobago. Such is the system. But let's see where this kind of thing leads. When you have the bad guy, the voices of the bad guy coming from inside the building, from inside the camp. The enemy is inside the camp already. Let's see where that actually leads. Because when you're dealing with a group where the consequences are as serious as prisoners, you tend to see the effect better. And this was always something that I've said. When you look at how prison officers are dealt with, I think what makes the prison officer's job the most dangerous isn't the prisoners, it's corrupt prison officers. Because if this system is running correctly, no matter how dangerous, how scary, how legitimately well connected a detainee or prisoner might be, they are supposed to be isolated and insulated inside of the prison. But when you have your own prison officers giving them access to outside, that's what actually puts the prison officers at risk. And if you have some prison officers bending to the will of whichever inmates are in the prison at that moment, then that puts the other prison officers who would want to stand up against that at more of a risk, because that other guy on the other shift is already doing what I want. You're now spoiling this good thing. But if every prison officer, every one of them, maintained a standard of integrity where they did nothing outside of the legal framework for these prisoners, then there wouldn't be any expectation from the prisoners. And I think that in and of itself would bring them under a lot more safety than they are now. Foiled maximum security prison break sparked latest attacks on officers. Deadly plot. This is also from the Saturday Guardian, and it's from the lead editor Mark Basant, an investigative report. A possible escape plan unhinged by prison officers in the Wayne Jackson building at the maximum security prison in Arouca 2 Wednesdays ago may have been the impetus for a fresh wave of violent attacks against the officers over the last week and a half. Prison officers Nigel Jones and Trevor Surratt, we know that they were gunned down tragically over the last 2 weeks. On Wednesday, November 24th, however, prison officers searched the Wayne Jackson building, formerly Building 13, and what they discovered shocked them. What we found were holes in the walls of the upper section, and we had to remove the inmates and place them in the lower section. We discovered that the holes linked each cell and led all the way to the back of the Wayne Jackson building. They were able to conceal the holes by plastering them over with pictures and newspapers, but it certainly looked like something bigger was in the planning. A senior prison source told the Sunday Guardian. Now, that's some interesting stuff. And it isn't the first time we've seen a prison break or an attempted prison break in Trinidad and Tobago, but that's a lot of work to get done. I mean, I honestly didn't know that people in Trinidad would have been capable of digging holes through an entire prison building while under regular guard, because that building is the building those people were placed in to be under regular guard, because they were supposed to be high profile and really dangerous, so they were put in a separate building to be placed under special guard, and under special guard they were able to dig holes in concrete, I'm presuming concrete walls, through the entire building before anyone noticed. I think such a thing should have someone in there losing a job, but maybe they can't afford to fire too many prison officers because not many people may be looking to take up those jobs. Senior prison officers who remain on duty in the building confirmed that the locks of many of the cells had been damaged by the inmates and they had to change it to a different style of locks. And while that remains a serious cause of concern among the ranks of the prison service, there's also troubling information about very senior prison officers directly assisting some of these high-risk inmates, potentially endangering the lives of their own colleagues. I think the potential has already been actualized or realized in some of these cases. Last week, it was revealed by the Prison Officers Association General Secretary Lester Walcott that the high-risk inmates at the Wayne Jackson building had vowed to kill 13 prison officers who worked at the building before Christmas. Further investigations by Guardian Media revealed that the list that Walcott was referencing in fact contained the names of 50 prison officers working at the building, which at least 4 senior prison sources confirmed was handed over to a high-risk inmate by a very senior prison officer. That sounds like they know precisely which prison officer it is. And I'd hope if they do know which one it is, that something can be done about that very soon, because it seems like this, I could count that as attempted murder of 50 prison officers by handing over a list with the private information of 50 officers to a high-profile inmate. Now, something that I found scarily interesting was the fact that how precisely these threats are being carried out. Someone from inside the prison is able to so precisely carry out assassinations of officers on the outside. So that's a very scary thing. And for a according to how this article has it phrased, a very senior officer or official to hand over a list to a prisoner, that's about as bad as it gets. And I'd hope if they know that he handed it over, they'd know who handed it over. Someone must have some more information on this, but unfortunately in many of these cases, the fear is what keeps many people in line. And unfortunately, the fear keeping you in line is what keeps those that you are afraid of on the top of it. On Friday, a list of 34 of the 50 names was leaked online. This occurred after the Sunday Guardian had already been told by about the detailed list of officers and had already seen several of the names. Prison and intelligence sources said the behavior of some senior officers is under scrutiny and they are hoping to get tangible results on this soon. The reason why they chose 13 of the 50 was that they were seen as soft targets, but that does not mean the others like myself are not in danger. A prison officer working inside the Wayne Jackson building told the Sunday Guardian. And the article goes quite a bit deeper into some of the allegations and into some of the complications in the situation, but it generally constantly points to the same angle, to the same line. There are dangerous inmates on the inside whose danger, can only really be realized with the aid and the help of prison officers. And it would seem that a lot of the aid and help they are getting from these officers are from senior officers. How much scarier can you get? If you're attempting to be an honest prisons officer in our prison service and you go into that entire system with, as according to the article, quoting it as the article said it, with a very senior officer being already obviously so much in cahoots or in the pockets, or however you want to phrase it, in partnership with high profile inmates, that they would hand over lists that they would be fully aware would put junior officers' lives at risk. How can you be a new person entering that service and expect to trust anyone in that hierarchy? Something like that destroys the trust in the entire service. And if you can't trust your fellow officer and you have to work in a very unwelcoming, dangerous situation where this guy once wouldn't mind passing you out and you can't trust the man who is supposed to be on your side, it kind of leans into the idea that maybe at least I might as well make some money while I'm here. And that's why the contemplation I did on this, I called it that's why the contemplation I did on this, that's why the contemplation I did on this, I called it in relation to the statement coined, or at least popularized, by Pablo Escobar. Plata or plomo, silver or lead. And that really does seem to be a lot of the situation many of those prisons officers would find themselves in. And the silver looks more tempting when you have your fellow prison officers assisting some of these inmates in providing lead to the rest. That's all I have for now. I hope you were educated, entertained, or informed. And do drop a comment if you have something to say, or make sure and tap that like button whether you have something to say. And I'll see you in the next video.
And you feel the music, rising with the time.